All right, we just agreed that we were going to get all our coughs out of the way before we started, but I guess I lied.
Um,
Welcome, Sunday, January 21st, That Change Show. Again, live off the cuff, 30, 40 minutes or so. And the topic of this episode is, are Agile transformations still relevant? And so that topic was picked because, I don't know, it's the LinkedIn algorithm seems to know when I want to do a topic on something because it starts just presenting with horribly incorrect information about Agile in general to me, and it just makes me angry. So, and normally this is a solo show, but I'm excited that Ken Rickard is joining me all the way from Florida.
sorry. It's about as cold as Canada here, so yeah.
Right on. For those who are listening on the podcast, we might have a couple of little images we're going to show here and there, so you can always catch the video versions of this on leanchange.tv, and that'll get you through to our YouTube channel, and you can check those things out. Ken, why don't you give us a little bit of introduction about yourself?
Sure, yeah. I tend to think of myself as an enterprise coach, agnostic of any one particular way of doing things, but kind of more of an alchemist, from a change perspective. I currently work for a company called Insight, although I do a lot of nights and weekends with Jason as we build up things for lean change and new ideas from a transformational space.
Cool. And you have recently just become a
ICEC holder, which is expert. I always like to put air quotes around that, whatever that means. Enterprise coach.
right on. So the interesting thing about that is, I wonder if this whole world of agile transformation would be in a better spot if that existed beforehand. Now, I'm again not huge on certifications, but I do know how that was created and who created it.
Yeah,
Obviously, it's coming from Lisa Adkins' amazing work and Michael Spade, um, and who both come from organizational change backgrounds, which is fantastic. I just as a, I don't know if I'll get in trouble for saying this or not, but I remember we brought them up to do a course for a client up here, a big client, I would say, and we actually funded it because the funding process to actually get it approved and get them up here to pay for it would have taken, 6 to 8 months. So us, the
yeah,
outside consultants, actually funded it. And I remember a buddy I was working with, he said, "Let me get this straight. So you're telling me that the four of us are funding a multi-billion dollar company to pay for their training, and we build them back for it every month. So we just like added a little bit monthly payback."
yeah.
So I'll probably get in trouble for that, but at least I didn't mention the client.
Uh-oh.
But anyway, so this, you know, when I think about agile transformation, I guess I started working on them in the mid to late 2000s, and I was late to the party. I mean, Capital One started in the early 2000s. I think every coach I know in the universe worked at Capital One at some point, probably as early as 2002, maybe. And
Yeah,
that's been 20 years of ups and downs and waves of this and that and processes and consultants and stuff. And last year, I know they laid off about 1,000 of their quote unquote Scrum Master slash delivery managers. And that's been a bit of a trend too. Agile coaching teams, complete agile coaching teams getting tossed. I've seen that in some of the banks and insurance
yeah,
and stuff.
right.
And I'm wondering what's going on with agile transformations. Are they still needed? Are people still doing them? Like,
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I mean, to me, I think, most organizations, especially the financial institutions and the telecoms and the health insurance, which are the bulk majority of the folks that are trying their best to take on a kind of quote unquote transformation. Most of these organizations are so big and so lumbering that when they say they're going to take on an agile transformation or they start agile in pockets and it starts to grow a little bit, it's really kind of dampened by the whole size of the organization and its unwillingness to change. So they're probably doing things in small pockets and doing fairly well, but also hitting their heads up against the ceiling of improvement because of the size of the organization and the complexities of it. So when time comes in order to tighten the belt, it often seems that these are the first things to go because it's the initiatives that are helping them change into something new, that they would rather just kind of put on the shelf or put on hold in some way, while they just kind of hunker down and kind of wade their way through these tough times. And those ebbs and flows come and go, is what I've seen. And so we'll go through periods of coaching being a very popular thing, Agile and Scrum, things like SAFe being very popular. And then we kind of have to tighten the belt. And then we see all those things kind of go away for a year or two, or at least not be nearly as important. And then as soon as things start to get better, then okay, now we can all rush back in.
Yeah, that's very similar to, the company that I mentioned where we paid for the training. Um, Cost center versus value producing center. And if you are perceived as a cost center and not
Yeah.
providing
Sure.
direct value, but I think that's the way business has always worked. I don't think it's really specific to agile transformation or coaching groups. I think that's just always
Sure.
the way it's been. It's somebody at the top is looking at a spreadsheet and goes, "Oh shit, we need to cut 30%." Who
Right.
doesn't make stuff?
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah,
So supporting roles.
yeah,
Because when you're kind of in that hunker down mode, I mean, the support roles are really what's not needed because the support is what's there to help you change. And so if we're not going to change because we're going to stand still, we're seeking stability, as opposed to adaptability, then, the idea of us needing the people who help us change is obviously, not as important at the time as it will be in the future when we decide to start changing again.
yeah. Like in our case, there was, obviously everybody's got a budget for their agile transformation because somebody's got to pay for it. The way that we had structured it was, I guess, like a tax almost. So X number of dollars was dedicated per team, and the teams that really wanted to change um, would use that budget for coaching. So it was basically you have X dollars, which buys X, Y days of coach for your team. That's all you get. And teams could also just take that budget and say, well, we don't want to coach. We're going to use that extra X dollars for more features for the project.
Yeah.
So we kind of had to shoehorn it into, like, this even went to the statement of work. We had to phrase it as project augmentation in order just to work around the way funding works and stuff like that. So,
Right. Yeah.
when I see these, I guess the two camps, right? There's the left side manifesto camp, which is the honor. It's about the manifesto. You're not doing agile right, like the extreme side of the left versus the right. Somewhere in the middle is those organizational realities are always going to be needed. Whether that's agile or not is kind of irrelevant.
Yeah. And, agile being a word that's tossed around a lot, I feel like they'll be more, there may be some more likelihood that agile would get kind of set aside than just plain old everyday kind of change initiatives that are trying to help the organization improve. I don't know, but agile as of late has certainly become a trigger word for a lot of folks and many organizations who have decided they don't need those kind of attributes in their organization right now. The number of coaches seem to be looking for jobs on LinkedIn is astronomically higher than it was just 2 years ago. So I think it's a really interesting time. It reminds me of the kind of ways to change, that you've laid out, and then of course we've come back through and put it more to a transformative kind of approach where the 5 waves equals some kind of motion through, a change at the personal level, because people, organizations are made of people, and who was it that said that every problem is a people problem? Jerry Weinberg, or was it Virginia Satir? I can't remember.
Yeah.
We always, one of those two originally said it. But the organizations themselves, if we're not changing at a people level, then most likely we're just kind of going through the motions in some way. We're swapping one part for another instead of actually addressing the entire system. And so those 5 waves of change, and we'll put the image up. You said in the background or something, right? So for the folks that are not watching the video. You may have to go there and look. But the ways move from this kind of superficial, only swapping out technology and process, because that's what we can control and what we can easily change, into actually starting to address the system by the third wave, and then eventually into the collective of the people recognizing that, hey, we're all collectively responsible for what we're doing now. And if we're going to change it, we all need to change in some way. Then to eventually into the fifth wave being about yourself. So you can only control yourself, can't control everybody else. So if you start with yourself and you start changing yourself, then most likely it'll start a movement, albeit slow, and you gotta have patience, but it'll start a movement within an organization from within.
Mhm. Yeah, that idea was I guess kind of born through observation. So, back in the early 2010s, I guess, when Agile Transformation was a huge deal, like here around the Toronto area, all the banks, telecoms, everybody, even earlier, I think one of the telecoms, I think it was 2009, 8 when I started working with them. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and, over the next 10 to 15 years, the pattern became pretty obvious. It was kind of close to an 18-month cycle for enterprises where the year-long transformation program has run its course. The VP of Agile or whatever it is tossed in favor of a new one, or the consulting firm is tossed out and a new one is brought in. And because we always used to joke about this, that you never want to be the first people in there because it doesn't matter what you do, it ain't going to work. When you're in the first
Right.
wave, the people, especially in enterprises, they've got to live with Agile through all of their existing ceremonies for at least a year, 18 months, 2 years before they really understand how it's going to affect things. Like I went into this insurance company and they just finished their annual planning. It was, I don't know, August, September-ish. So all their budget was done, all their programs were done. One of their programs was an agile transformation. And I actually talked them out of doing anything with it because that is just, it ain't gonna work. You've already decided how you're gonna spend all of your money. Your whole next year is basically gonna be whoever's in charge of this program running headfirst into a wall for a year because nobody can change. You've already decided what all the other teams and things are going to do. You might be able to sprinkle some agile dust and some process on them to make things a little bit easier. But I don't think it's going to work. What you're going to get out of that is you're going to see how much of a disruption agile is going to be to your organization. And then the year after that, now when it comes back to doing your annual planning, which by the way, don't do that anymore. Um, when it comes
Mm-hmm.
time to do that, now you're going to have some good insights and ideas about how it's going to affect your whole company. Now you can actually probably do something about it. And then the second wave is going to start, and then it's going to get a little bit better. And I mean, we would get into an organization, we would know what coaching or consulting firm was there before us.
Yeah.
So yeah, it
Right.
was it was like, be the second or third wave because you can come in and do the same thing,
Yeah.
use the same language, but now people are ready because they've lived through it.
Yeah, it's almost like the big consulting firms come in and they help an organization or a grouping of teams or a program or some kind of product being built. But the idea is that they'll often just drop off playbooks. So that's definitely first wave behavior, where like, oh, well, there's this cookie cutter thing. We just need to do this. Back in the day, it used to be Spotify. Everybody just wants to try to emulate Spotify. I mean, there's still some organizations trying to do that now, but not nearly as many. But whatever that cookie cutter approach is, like just bring it in, and whatever it worked over there for them, obviously it's going to work for us. We want to be like those guys, you know. So yeah, I wish you kind of put this premise out there in the beginning of our transformation is still relevant. I was just talking to another ice holder. Actually, I found out lives here really close to me the other day, and we were sitting down for lunch and chatting over things and. I had said to him, I said, I wish organizations would stop focusing on things like Scrum and Agile and transformation and all that. And I wish they would just focus on two things. They really only need to focus on two things. And it would be that they are adapting in the short term to the change that they can't control within their organization because it's coming from without or outside of their organization. And they don't control society. They don't control industries and markets, and they don't control their competitors. But then in some way, they have to kind of react to those things. Hopefully, they're leaning into that and it's a little more proactive than completely reactive. but that they're adapting and changing in the short term to what's going on around them and what they need to do, but that they're also evolving over the long term through that adaptation in order to keep evolving and keep getting better at responding to change. And if organizations can just focus on those two things and not directly focus on all the other things, because what falls out of that will happen organically as long as they enable the system to work together towards continuous improvement. But yeah, we love our off the shelf. Hey, Agile, 499.99. Yes, please, I'll take that right off the shelf and just install it in over here. Just hit the play button and it'll run through and install, and then we'll be fine after that. So yeah, wish it wasn't so.
Yeah. And when you get into enterprises too, because they've gone through it so many times, like you said, it's just exhaustion. I think that's why we see the new ways of working, as the Aussies have called it, because they were all fed up with Agile.
Yeah, I hear a lot of that now. Yeah, right.
Yeah, but it's the thing is, I'd argue we're in the late majority phase of Agile, if you will. 2012-ish is when Agile started becoming a big business. That's when a lot of the scaling frameworks started gaining in popularity. There's a company called Version One, which I know you know about them, but for the listeners out there, Version One's been doing state of Agile surveys since 2006 or seven, somewhere around there, maybe
Yeah,
2008. It's been a while. So they've been tracking popular methods and stuff like that. And you can just go through those reports, or even better, dump it into Copilot or GPT and have it analyze them for you. Side note, we did a decade of Agile report manually after their 10th one to analyze those patterns. And as soon as it became a way to print money, the intention of Agile kind of got lost. Like the
yeah.
last dumb thing that inspired this show was I saw somebody post on LinkedIn, the most unagile thing you can do is release every sprint. And I was like, what the? That's like, what? Yes. Separate would you from should you be able to, right? A lot of people don't understand because, I've seen this a gazillion times in Agile, is most Agile coaches have never written software or worked on a product team. And the change managers who are getting thrown into Agile transformations certainly have no idea about how to build software and that stuff. So, if you haven't done it, it's harder. But you talk about, yes, you should be able, it's potentially shippable increment. That's the phrase. That means, yes, you should have something potentially shippable at the end of the sprint, but that's as far as it goes. So now people read that and they go, oh, you can't release every 2 weeks. We're on a 3-year program. Well, Agile doesn't say stop thinking, but if you don't at least get the basics right, there, the LinkedIn answers thing, I think that's making everybody really stupid with respect to Agile. I saw one the other day. It was, how do you use the daily stand-up to solve team problems? Like, you don't solve problems in the stand-up. The purpose of the stand-up is to plan the day to get you closer towards the sprint goal.
Yeah. I know you just getting ready to put your AI for Change Managers book out. The one thing that I'm waiting to see is that, with the large language models, whatever's put into them is about as smart as it'll be coming out, unless they can build it to be more learning than that, and it can actually learn things based on data it didn't ingest. I'm not sure if that's a thing yet or not, but maybe in the future it will be. But I keep thinking about, like the internet, LinkedIn, social media. The things that are said there are point of view, opinionated, often at times at least incorrect, in their interpretation of maybe what one thing is or isn't. And of course, then nobody agrees anyway. So how are we going to build a single model that is it going to need to have 50 answers, and so everybody gets their own answer, so then we all are still in the same place? But if it only has one answer, well, then now we're all dogmatically, lemmings jumping off the cliff. So I don't really understand yet what it's going to be. It's going to be really interesting though, because I think there's some danger there, and that if what's fed into it is all the same, and also, by the way, it's the kind of commodified dogma of agile and things like Scrum and Safe, then anybody who uses those models is going to get those type of answers. It'll only reinforce the bad behavior that's currently exists on social platforms now. That's my concern.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Especially with the rush to create coaching bots and stuff.
Yeah,
Um, they're informational, but it's exactly what you said. It depends on how people are training it, because I can make a closed ecosystem bot, which is my data.
right.
I can train it to answer things the way I would answer the questions. And that is very scary, because you could use, any AI system to ask a question, then you can ask a specific bot that's on the GPT store and get a different answer, because you'll get somebody who's trained it. If you got started in enterprise agile, you know, after 2013, 14, there's a pretty good chance you're more biased towards process. And that's obviously not the case
Right.
entirely. But it's like, there's a great book called The Kingmakers, and it describes this idea about baby duck syndrome, which is the baby duck syndrome. I hope I get this right. I'll put it on the screen if I get it incorrect. But, um, you know, when baby ducks are born, if the first thing they see is a dog, dog is mom. It's imprinting. It
Mm.
imprints it into their brain. That's the first thing they see. So the
Yeah,
new Kingmakers talks about this in a developer context, which is developers fall in love with the first language that they use, and nothing
yeah,
else will ever compare. This is why you get these, 20-year experience developers who really have 1 year of experience, the same 1 year, 20 times over. They just write Java, they just write
yeah,
.NET, and they might be fantastic developers in that one language, but the landscape's totally different. I think it's the same in Agile. You fall in love with the first Agile transformation or process model that worked well for you. And then now that's the truth. So if Safe worked great,
yeah.
Safe is now Agile. And I could care less. I don't care about frameworks. I think most Agile people are mad at Safe because they're not the ones printing the money from it, and they didn't create it first.
Mhm.
The intention, if you go back to it, Dean actually says this, and throw some angry comments if I got this wrong, but I'm pretty sure I read this. You don't use Safe to scale an organization. You
Really?
you,
That's
you
funny.
use it when you're already a gigantic company and you want to organize your people differently around the work. But you
Yeah.
see that diagram and it's just like, that's not Agile. Or you look at the pastel version of it, like Jurgen's, which is basically Safe with pastel colors. Um, and people see those things and they see prescription.
Mm. Yeah, I think through the years we've worked together, I think I've become increasingly less attached to the types of agile frameworks that are out there. In a good way, I think. I just stopped paying attention to it for the most part altogether, because I think I used to be so dogmatic around things like Scrum that I think I wasn't helping. So I just decided to stop kind of dabbling in delivery altogether and just start coaching towards leadership and organizational change. I have more passion there to begin with, and then um, it gets me out of the weeds. So I think getting out of the weeds was good for me, because then I don't get so hung up on well, it has to be this way, or hey, this is the framework, this is what it says. Like we need to do that this way, which was a lot of how I used to be kind of growing up. I mean, I've been in the agile industry for 15 plus years, I think, at this point, and it wasn't until about the past 5 years that I really started to shift that behavior.
Mhm.
Uh, so yeah, I think it was through just trying to look outside the bubble of things like Scrum and decide that Scrum's great, it works, and it has a need, or can fulfill a need, I should say. But it shouldn't be applied dogmatically, and it shouldn't be the only thing. So I'm much more kind of agnostic in that way.
Mhm.
And, and I think the industry at large is too focused on frameworks too. I think we're starting to see that out of a lot of folks that they're really starting to be this pushback against Scrum and Safe and for various reasons, but you know, in part, I think it's because there has been an over-indexing or an over-emphasis on frameworks, and so we've got too commoditized in that realm. And I think it's time to get back to basics. I hear a lot of people talking about that, kind of getting back to basics.
Yeah, simplify. Because I think
Yeah,
the more you use and try things out, the more you realize they don't have to be that complicated. We don't fight complexity by making things and processes more complicated. We loosen the controls and the
right.
constraints, and we let the brain, which is more complex, deal with it and the interactions of the people and the systems, which I think is good. Um,
Yep.
a company I just did some work with a couple of weeks ago, and this has been because you talked a lot about stance, like how your stance shifted
Mm-hmm.
the 5 years ago. And my stance has always been when I am hired to do quote unquote training, I'm always talking about by the book versus the real world, always.
Mm-hmm.
So we talked a lot about how do we deal with this particular problem, which is getting interrupted in the sprint too much, and then we never finish the sprint commitment and stuff. And the teams weren't stable completely. And we just talked about, well, and here's how it would work in Scrum if you were doing it by the book. And I even told them, I said, I don't know, I've probably worked with thousands of teams, and I've never seen one that has ever done any process model by the book. It can't happen that way because the process models don't understand your context.
Yeah.
And the conversation was great. It just kind of switched their view and their stance to, oh, maybe we shouldn't be looking to be more agile or follow Scrum better. Maybe we should try to figure out how we use the 12 principles to figure out what's important for us and use that to help us decide what to do as a team.
Yeah. I mean, certainly being more adaptable is going to be a good thing, you know.
Yeah.
But the challenge I think a lot of people in organizations have though is that they're coming from a very rigid top down, and this is going to be like, yeah, obviously, but I'm going to probably say it in a slightly different way than hopefully people are thinking. But they've come from a very rigid kind of top down approach where things like the PMBOK, right, the project management book of knowledge, was the thing that guided their every move, and it's laid out in great detail, and we just have been conditioned in those systems to look for the instructional orders that are to the nth degree of what we're supposed to do. And if it's not going to look it up in a book and it's going to tell you what to do, well, then it's your leadership or your kind of management above you that's kind of disseminating those instructions down to you. And so I feel like we've been conditioned to look for that. In walks things like Scrum with a minimal guide. In walks Agile, which is 4 values and 12 principles. And so our natural tendency, given what we've been conditioned to do, is to go, oh, wow, this is really lightweight, but it doesn't suit my needs. So let me plug the things I know into the holes that I see because it isn't fully defined in their minds. So they kind of like, okay, I see the reality of Scrum, and then here's my reality. Let me merge these two things together. And so that's how we get this kind of like hybrid approach, and companies that are transforming yet not really changing anything. Um, Pretty unfortunate.
Yeah. I think the a lot of the companies today, because they've been at it for so long, um, this is why I was thinking are agile transformations still relevant because they've been going on for so long. They're already
Yeah,
in their third or fourth wave of infinite number of waves. It's not like there's a finite amount. Once you hit wave five, like CMMI level five, you're done and you're good. It's the waves keep
yeah,
going because all companies keep evolving.
Only.
Um,
Um,
the coaches,
coaches.
at least from what the enterprises here are hiring for, are established roles in a department that is more acting like a process improvement department. So, back in the early 2010s, there were a couple of companies doing agile COEs, but it was very misunderstood what an agile coach was supposed to do. Nobody knew. It was just
sure.
like, oh, I guess we need an agile coach. And then as companies started learning, then they started adding stacks of hierarchy. So they might already have a Lean Six Sigma or process improvement group. Then they add an agile improvement group, which is a different stack of hierarchy. Then when lean startup and intrapreneurship, which I don't think I've heard anybody talk about intrapreneurship anymore,
Mhm.
the way it used to be after lean startup. Then they spun up a stack of that. Then they spun up a stack of design thinking people. Now you've got a project that you're kicking off that they want to transform, and you've got 5 people that are basically their purpose is to do the same thing, which is to help the team work better. And they've all got their individual objectives, and they've all got their individual process models, and it's just compounded the problem. But now those are established groups in organizations. So when they're hiring for coaches, they're just plugging you into an ecosystem that's more about process improvement, and they're not
Yeah.
necessarily starting a transformation.
Yeah, yeah, it gets one of the things we've been talking about and working on is the two change strategies to effective organizations. And what you're nailing right there is the optimization one, the horizontal growth, because a lot of organizations really don't want to change themselves or evolve themselves or transform themselves. It tends to be that they want to stay mostly the same, but they just want to get better at what they're doing now. And to me, that's optimization. And so even though the word transformation is thrown around in a lot of organizations, really what they're doing is optimization, not transformation. Because transformation requires you to do something or to succeed in ways that you never have before. And to get that, it means you have to vertically change yourself. So you raise a plane of existence and being. So your beliefs change, your behavioral patterns change, and vertical development requires you to take on a whole nother set of beliefs and actions. And without that, you're not transforming, you're not evolving. You're just staying in the same plane of existence. You're just kind of leaning out or optimizing what you do now to get narrower and narrower, which is ultimately turning you into more rigid and rigid. So you can't just optimize, you also have to evolve. And you can't just evolve, you also have to optimize.
Do you think leaders are more open to those kind of conversations now than they used to be? Because a lot of the knock on Agile was kind of the woo-woo nature of it. It's about beliefs and mindset and being Agile, not doing Agile, and all that stuff. And there's no way you could go into a C-level office and talk that way. They'll throw you out. But do you think the landscape has changed where leaders are less? I think leaders get a bad rap, to
Well,
be honest with you.
yeah.
But
I, well, to back in the day, this was probably, I don't know, 2014, 2013, somewhere around there. I walked into a CIO's office and was talking to him about Agile. And we got into a point where we were talking about the difference between, of course, this was when this phrase was big, between doing and being Agile. And he literally laughed me right out of the office. So that's interesting you brought that up. More recently, just last year, there was a kind of more senior director within IT I was at a kind of workshop with, and we were talking about the behavioral patterns and those kind of things that would need to shift in order to vertically develop, not just optimization. And he kind of jokingly, in some ways, said, "Well, I didn't realize I had to become a Buddhist in order to practice Agile." So there's a bit of that that still exists, but I think the rate of change that can't be controlled by any individual necessarily, highly complex change, is more, people are more aware of it now, especially in leadership positions. The digital age has been around long enough that it's kind of created this age of complexity. And so I think that has been recognized enough that more and more leaders are open to the idea that they can't possibly figure these things out unless they start to change their system. Now, I still believe that most of them think about optimization, no matter what they call it, they're still trying to optimize their systems, or the parts in their system, they're trying to look for problems, isolate and analyze those problems, and then ultimately try to superficially or symptomatically solve for those problems, as opposed to doing it the more of the diagnostics way, or the synthesis of the system as a whole, and then try to sense your way through the system in order to then respond to the system and see how it responds. So I don't think they've not learned those things yet. I know I'm doing a good bit of trying to get those concepts in front of leaders. And it's a general rule of thumb. I've gotten very good responses in the past year and a half or so from people in leadership positions that are recognizing that they can't operate in the ways that they've been operating and still succeed.
Yeah, it's you've been talking about the five levers of change for quite a while, and
Yeah,
the levers that you're describing there are things we can see. Like anybody can muck around with an org chart because it's
right.
visible. So it's the visible versus the invisible, and we seem to focus our attention on the visible because it's we can see it, we can touch it, we can move it around, we can see
Yeah,
cause and effect. And I put up some bunny ears, air quotes, because you can't really, but you'll see, hey, if I mucked around with my structure and I reorganized my teams this way, the output was worse. Therefore, like that kind of reductionist and simplistic thinking,
sure.
it doesn't work. But um, yeah, I think maybe they are more open to looking at the other levers because you've got to make an impact. If you come in as either a consulting group or the new transformation leader or the new VP of Agile or whatever, you've got a small window where you have to prove your worth. So you have to pull the
Yeah,
visible levers. But maybe that is going to be the next shift with Agile transformations is we start to look at those other levers.
yeah. I think the pandemic really helped too because I think that that level of chaos that everyone was experiencing at the same time, I think really leveled the playing field in a lot of leaders' minds as to like, okay, we're all in this ship together, whether it feels like it at times or not. You know, I mean, I may be in this position and this part of an organization in this company, and I have competitors, but at the same time, when things get really crazy across the board, we're all in the same boat, and we all have to deal with it in very similar ways. And so I think that kind of unification moment probably helped a lot of leaders recognize that these kind of chaotic situations can creep up at any time now, and smaller events are happening pretty consistently on a regular basis in our global pandemics, but that level of chaos being injected so quickly, I think, caused a lot of leaders to realize that they can't just do this the way they've been doing it. They got to shift something.
Yeah. So as we get into the wrap up, what would you do if you get tossed into a transformation situation? Now, in today's context, it's going to be obviously they've been dabbling or trying some things for a number of years potentially, and they want to restart. Like maybe they hit the bottom of the wave, and now it's like,
Yeah.
okay, we think we get it. Um, we know Ken's the best in the world. Here's $40 million. Transform us. What are you going to do?
Um, yeah, I think, where old Ken from years yester would have probably just dove right in and started, teaching people frameworks in hopes that they would have some epiphany and be like, oh, well, we've just been doing this wrong. And I think I've done enough of that in the past that I realized that isn't what's going to work. I've become much more patient, much more wise about these things. And so I think the first thing I would do is, I wouldn't gravitate towards that kind of delivery agility frameworks stuff. One of the other concepts I've worked on is the three agilities. I would actually lean to the other side of the three agilities, and I would go to the change agility bucket of things, which is really about helping people to understand what and how they need to adapt, and then what it is they need to do to evolve over time, and more of that vertical sense of development. So developing self, and that's really hard. It takes a long time. So you could have a track of vertical development going on at the same time you could have optimization going on because hey, they're already doing something. They're probably thinking about, well, we just need to do this better. Okay, great. Let's entertain that. But at the same time, you're never going to actually get above the ceiling that you're currently at unless you start to focus on vertical growth, vertical development of people. So I think probably the first thing I would do would be to start putting those vertical kind of deliberately evolutionary ideas in front of these people at the organization so that they could start to see that they have to start looking beyond optimization towards evolution.
Mm. Yeah, that's a good point. That just clicked in my brain. It's not an either or. It's not vertical or horizontal, it's both.
Right.
And it's the timing of when you intervene, I think, in each of those axes.
Yeah, adapt in the short term, evolve in the long term, right? And respond to change, change that you can't control. The evolution is to help you respond better to change in the future. So we've got to evolve, which is that vertical growth. But at the same time, we can't just focus on evolving because in the meantime, we still have to get stuff done. And we still have stuff in flight and we work the way we work now. And so that's really about the optimization. So adapt or optimize in the short term while you're also focusing on evolving through iterations, which is the longer path, by the way. Obviously, adaptation, optimization type stuff is shorter path.
Mm-hmm.
Evolutionary things and evolving the organization or the system, longer path.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. I remember I'm pretty sure it was Johanna Rothman who's written probably, in my opinion, the best agile books out there. This would have been a long time ago at AYE. I remember her saying something like, if you really want your company to be agile, just cut 40% of your projects and watch what happens. And I worked in a place where the VP of transformation did that. He just said they had data that said it was 14 to 16 months median delivery for projects. He said deliver
Yeah.
something every 6 months. That's it. Like you talk
Yeah.
about a chaos grenade, right? So that forced, I think, a trigger in both axes. But yeah. So tell folks how they can get in touch with you or find out more about stuff that you're working on.
Probably LinkedIn's the best place. I tend to pay attention there the most. Post there occasionally, although I think I'll probably start posting there more this year. We've got a number of things in the works, so I want to make sure we get those things out there. So I'll probably start posting there more often. I usually post about my classes there, so I do teach the IC Agile's enterprise coaching track courses, so the ICP ENT and the CAT. And of course, I teach your Lean Change Agent Foundations course as well, and all the Lean Change stuff. I usually post about all those things on LinkedIn.
Cool. Yep. And I know, are you going to be at Scrum Gathering? So did you accept the thing
Yeah.
in New Orleans?
Yeah. So May, I think it's like the third week of May or something. I think my session as of right now is on the 22nd of May down in New Orleans. Yeah, I'll be down there talking about how to get your transformation air quotes unstuck.
Right on.
These adaptable techniques within organizations. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. And then hopefully Agile 2024 will both be there so we can overdose on
Yeah.
barbecue and
We'll likely sponsor again for a booth, and then yeah, hopefully we get selected to do a workshop and or individual sessions. So yeah, we'll be there.
right on. All right. Thanks for taking the time on this nice, sunny, and warm. It's only like -8 today or something in Canadian degrees. So thanks for taking the time.
All right. Yeah, thanks, Jason. Appreciate it.
Okay.
All right. Bye.